And most of the countries in the West achieved this with African resources, which were freely given or with little cost. France in particular grew to become one of the top guns in the world, as a result of its exploitation of its African colonies, something that the United Nations and its Security Council turned a blind eye to. All the political elites in France know that Africa is critical to the growth and development of France, and to tell you how important Africa is to France, former President François Mitterrand once prophesied in 1957 that, without Africa, France will have no history in the 21st century. His successor, President Jacques Chirac, also acknowledged that, without Africa, France will slide down into the rank of a third world power. According to Xavier Renaud, a French scholar, Africa is critically important to France for several reasons, including maintaining an international status, independent of US and Chinese influences, securing a permanent access to strategic resources, and benefiting from a monopolistic situation. And to attain these objectives and maintain its power over its former colonies, France has to pursue a global policy that is economic, political, and cultural. This is the reason why every successive administration in France has continued the colonial legacy. Even Emmanuel Macron, who said that France would no longer pursue a colonial policy in Africa, has also continued in the colonial path. The only difference is that that legacy passed down from each French administration has been destroyed in his hands. Emmanuel Macron has bungled everything so much so that not only is he despised in Africa, but he is also despised in France. While Africa despises him because he represents France and is a continuation of France's colonial legacy, Macron is despised by France elites because he supposedly destroyed the colonial legacy given to him by his predecessors. It was in his time that Africa woke up from its deep slumber and began to change the order of things. Anti-French sentiments also began to spread across the continent. Francophone Africa began to cut ties with France, choosing Russia and China as partners instead, and France lost its military influence in the Sahel. Burkina Faso, under the leadership of Ibrahim Taore, ended a defense agreement that has been in force since 1960 and kicked out French forces. Mali did the same, ending the 10-year Operation Barkhane, led by France to fight insurgency and insecurity in the country. Niger followed last year after the coup in July, dealing a significant blow to France's policy in Africa. In August last year, a group of 94 French senators wrote an open letter to President Macron, in which they criticized his administration over its Africa policy, which has triggered anti-French sentiment in the continent. The letter published by the French daily Le Figaro called on Macron to review France's policy in Africa. The senators also noted that the failure of Operation Barkhane was in great part the reason why France and its economic, political, and military presence are now rejected in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and the Central African Republic. Today, the Francafrique of yesterday has been replaced by the military Russafrique, the economic Chinafrique, or the diplomatic Americafrique, said the letter. Isn't it time to review our vision of Africa and its link with France? The letter asked. Despite their letter to the president, the situation did not change. Anti-French sentiments continued to increase, and African countries continued to prefer to work with Russia, China, and the non-European countries. And with the way things have evolved, it doesn't seem like France would ever get back the influence it had in Africa, because more African countries, including those that had strong ties with France, such as Senegal and Chad, have joined the trend of changing their policies towards France. Then in mid-December 2023, a former economic minister of France, Thierry Breton, said something that honestly, we can't believe went unnoticed. This man posted it on his Twitter page and nobody, not even African media houses, took note of it until now. What he said is something that every African, including African leaders, needs to think about deeply so they can chart the way forward. So what did Breton Thierry say? He said, "It's the imbecility of Emmanuel Macron that opened the eyes of Africans. One thing is sure, if France loses its colonies, our children and grandchildren will go to Africa to search for their livelihoods. Immigration will change direction. Macron needs to go. If not, France will suffer. Europe needs to unite to fight this new African vision. If one of the heads of the putschists falls, the others will abandon the vision. Africa does not have history, so Africa can't manage the world. Wow. Did you listen to that? With how fast information files in the age, it's truly baffling how this post went unnoticed until now. Let's analyze this statement. First, he said that it was the imbecility of President Macron that opened the eyes of Africans. Was it truly? First of all, the change in African geopolitics that began with the coup in the Sahel has become so obvious that French elites like Thierry know it. And that is why he said that the eyes of Africans have been opened. However, his statement meant that Africa has been asleep for a long time, and that is why France has been able to maintain its hold on the continent since colonial times. It also means that there have been deliberate actions by France to make the continent remain asleep by setting up puppet leaders, sending aid, and ensuring that Africa is continuously dependent on France in every aspect, including trade and defense. However, we would not agree with him saying that it was Macron's actions that opened the eyes of Africans. Rather, the insecurity and underdevelopment that Africans have suffered for so long, coupled with the coups which brought a change of leaders, is what opened the eyes of Africans and roused them from their slumber. The next thing Thierry said was that if France lost its colonies, the next generation of French citizens would go to Africa to search for their livelihood, and immigration would change direction. So, instead of Africans scrambling to go through dangerous routes to get to Europe in search of better opportunities, it would be French citizens coming to Africa. But to do what? Do you think he meant that French citizens would be forced to come to the shores of Africa, begging to settle down in search of good opportunities? No, that's not what he meant. This would be too low for the French superior mind. What Thierry actually means is that the next generation of French citizens would be forced to start a second wave of violent colonial occupation of Africa, where they would have free access to all the resources, both human and minerals, that Africa has to offer. Shocking, right? But it shouldn't be. France has always seen Africa as its backyard filled with all kinds of treasures that it can always access anytime it wants. Just because colonialism ended decades ago doesn't mean that it cannot start again in our time. Thierry is not the only one who has openly spoken about the recolonialism of Africa. Many French elites, such as former Chief of Defense Staff, General Lecointre, and US elites have advocated in recent times for the reconquest of the African continent. The reason why they can have so much confidence in saying this without fear of the backlash from so-called human rights advocates is that they believe that if it truly happens, there is nothing anybody, including the United Nations, can do about it. And they also believe that Africans cannot do anything about it either. After all, the African continent is just a continent filled with third world countries and unpatriotic leaders. This is why Thierry adds that Europe, not just France, needs to fight what he calls this new African vision. And the way to do it is to remove one of the military juntas, most likely through assassination. In his own words, if one of the heads of the putschists falls, the others will abandon the vision. First of all, France recognizes that these waves of coups are not like the former coups, where the military just took over for the love of power. They know that these coups are the beginning of a revolution. But it is so sad that there are still some people, even among African leaders, who regard these coups as nothing more than an attack on democracy. And because they recognize this fact, the best thing for Europe to do is to destroy the military governments. As Thierry said, if one falls, the others will abandon the vision. It is no wonder that Ibrahim Taore, the face of the African Revolution, has been subject to about 9 coup attempts in the 2 years he has been in power. Thierry's statement just confirmed the tactics France has been using and will continue to use to quell revolution in Africa. Finally, he said that Africa does not have history, so Africa can't manage the world. This statement is as wrong can be, but it just proves how France and the West regard Africa. To them, Africans are incapable of anything. Africa is not civilized and its people are not different from animals. So, it is up to them to teach Africans and help Africa manage its resources. What a stupid statement. Africa does have a rich history and culture that the Europeans tried to demoralize and step on during the colonial era. The truth is, as much as it makes us angry to hear this statement, What makes us even more angry is the puppet unpatriotic leaders that have graced the African continent since independence. If only Africa had good leaders and those good leaders were not assassinated, then France and the West would not have the guts to make such statements. The only thing Africa needs right now is strong, patriotic leaders who are ready to defend the interest of their people. Africa has all it needs to become the greatest continent on Earth. It doesn't need France or the West, only good leaders. What do you think? Let us know in the comments section below.